Well, folks, thanks again for tuning in to Stockwell Day-to-Day News. Thanks to our Canadian listeners and viewers, and also viewers in the U.S. and some in other parts of the world. So we value that very much, and keep the comments coming. It helps us to improve and deliver a product to you that's helpful to see what's going on behind the scene on some of the mainstream highlights in media today. The climate community and climate control community largely has been hit with a pretty major item here, because there's a report from Nature, Nature being a major publication used to talk about the projections and the effects of climate control and emissions and industry and all of that. One of the classic reports, one of their reports that's been out there for quite a number of years, that has actually been guiding decision making of lawmakers in Canada, the US, and in Europe in terms of the desperate need to control any kind of emissions. And we are all, of course, in favor of controlling emissions. This report was projecting, and it's been the long-held kind of the watermark among industry and among climate control and among those in governments who are coming up with the guidelines for what can be emitted into the atmosphere. But it had projected that with climate going the way it is, or supposedly, that by the year 2100, by the turn of the century, there would be a 62% reduction in economic activity, a 62% reduction if radical measures are not brought into place to control climate effects. Now, that is a devastating number, but it's been one of the key numbers, one of the matrix that has been used internationally by the banking community to make the decisions on what kind of companies they're going to lend money to, what kind of businesses they're going to finance, and it even has been controlling government regulation, been one of the major reports on that. Now, to their credit, Nature magazine, and this is being reported on extensively now, we just touched on it yesterday. I'm not saying we broke the story, probably Wall Street Journal was ahead on that and some other publications, but what it is saying they've done, and full credit to Nature and some of the others who were running with this devastating figure of a 62% drop in economic output. They said they got it wrong. Their figures were simply wrong. They're readjusting the entire report. They gave some reasons for that, and they say the actual amount that they think the so-called climate problem is going to see a reduction in the economy is 3 times less. It's about 23% reduction in economic output if something isn't done. That's a huge difference. And what we're saying now, what governments and the financial community needs to be doing, are you as governments and is the financial community going to make the adjustments now when they're evaluating what individuals get loans, what industries, the housing industry and others, or the energy industry? This should really be a opening up of credit to those companies that have long been restricted because it's seen that they're going to absolutely destroy the economy. So a major breakthrough, if you want to call it that. And again, I say credit to the companies, or sorry, to the researchers themselves for saying, oops, we got it wrong. Now the test is going to be, will mainstream media carry this news to the same extent? Because mainstream media is so vested heavily in culturally Marxist thinking that mainstream media is consistently against business, against entrepreneurs, against economic growth. So let's see, watch your newspapers, watch the sites, television, and other platforms that you go to, and just see if mainstream media is going to be covering this to any extent. There's also, we've been covering for a couple days, the fact that in the US, the administration there, the Trump administration, has been taking a hard look at the rules and regulations on everything from appliances to vehicles. And they have made a reduction, they've made a change in terms of restrictions on car manufacturers, how the distance that a car can go in terms of using how many liters or how many gallons per mile or gallons per kilometers. And the administration is dropping those. The ongoing analysis is showing that, in fact, this is not having as major an impact on the environment as was thought. And so you are going to see the price of cars coming down. Price of cars actually coming down and going more along guidelines, the science that's provable and not the science that gets torqued out of shape. And we talked yesterday about how we should be seeing the cost of appliances beginning to come down as the same analyses are being done, and ineffective and unneeded restrictions in manufacturing are seen as having no effect on the environment, but having detrimental effect on the economy. So look at what's happening there. Again, will the bank rules change accordingly in terms of who they lend money to? This is going to have a real effect on investment from around the world, because the EU has been, over the last 20 years, so aggressive on just accepting at face value every negative environmental report that has come out. And again, we should be watching and with concern, but we should be accurately measuring effects on the economy. But they've been in such a rush over the last 20 to 25 years throughout Europe to put in all of these rules that the cost of, like, if you can't have liquid natural gas, refined liquid natural gas, providing the energy for a city, for the electrical grid, or for part of a country, and you're relying more and more on wind and solar, which have their moments and have their applications. But in terms of especially European countries, which have something called winter, which really affects the cost and the need for energy, your energy costs go up the more you move away from efficient fuels. And as Europe has done that, the cost comparison now, if you're running a factory or any kind of a business or even your home, it averages out to about 38 cents per kilowatt hour to provide electricity on the grid in Europe. In the US now, it's about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a huge difference in terms of the cost of anything you're doing, whether it's heating your home or whether it's providing jobs and running a business. So what you're seeing is you're going to continue to see more and more investment coming into the US and less coming into places like the EU and like Canada, unless Canada responds and the EU responds to the scientific results that are coming out now, truly scientific ones, not the scare tactics. So you're going to see the problem get worse, and in countries like Canada and in the EU, if they continue to promote these restrictions, which are not, and this is a key point, which are not based on science. Also not based on economic science is the ongoing concern, and quite rightly, about the cost of groceries going up. This began in a really significant way during COVID, when governments around the world, Canada and the US included, were shutting down large parts of the economy because of the COVID issue and the pandemic. And during that time, what governments were doing were just pouring in, basically just creating money out of thin air, dumping billions, in fact, trillions of dollars into the economy to counteract for the fact they were shutting down businesses. And anytime you dump money into an economy that's not based on an increase in employment and in business, you get inflation, because you get more dollars chasing the products that are out there. So when you hear that, then governments will do this, they'll cause these inflationary trends, which makes the cost of everything go up. Now, there are other factors, but one of the single greatest factors is government spending. So I want you to be aware of this. What happens then, governments will say, even though they're causing the problem, they'll say, oh, it's the nasty people, it's the entrepreneurs in business, it's the people who are selling the products that are gouging. And in fact, there can be cases, there's legislation to protect if that happens. But if you have open and free markets, the gouging won't happen because the competitor will come along and keep the prices low. So keep this in mind. Every time you hear a politician, I don't care from what any party, announcing that he or she is just putting money into something, let's say subsidizing hugely, whatever it might be, something in the business sector or giving you free goodies. Maybe they're going to come and say, we're going to give you free, quote, free daycare until your kids are 18 years old or whatever it might be. Anytime a politician is, you see it in the news, promising free money and free stuff, you can count on the fact your groceries are going to keep going up. The cost of almost everything will keep going up. So hold your politicians, whether we're talking the municipal level, provincial, state, or national, hold them on this, counter them on this, and be aware that inflation is the single greatest cause of these price increases, and that's from government dumping money into the economy with promises to you of free stuff so that they can get reelected. In terms of the economy, the debate is still going on and people are watching closely. Is the present uptick in the stock markets that generally has been, there's the daily up and downs, but generally that we've been seeing, it is largely attributed to excitement about AI and the question, of course, are we in a so-called AI bubble? That means so much excitement about AI and so much investment coming into those companies that in fact it drives the markets up and results in a bubble which can then burst and leave everything in shatters for a couple of years, shatters and tatters. And we saw this, it was the typical thing with the so-called dot-com in the late 1990s, as we saw dot-com companies in cyber-related areas continue to increase and so much excitement, and then that bubble burst because of oversupply. There's a couple differences here that should be noted. First of all, one of the things that's the same with the dot-com supposed bubble, which did burst, is that the companies now, AI companies, that are driving this increase in investment, they're actually making money. They're actually bringing in, when you look at NVIDIA, when you look at some of these large companies and like Meta, they have huge revenues. They're actually making profits, and the excitement is continuing around that. And then there's an indicator to look for, and let's keep our eyes on this as we see companies like platforms like OpenAI and Perplexity about to go onto the market in terms of public market, letting people buy in great numbers. How the public and how the investing public reacts as some of these AI companies go public will also be a factor. So I know there's a lot of fear out there, and there should always be good caution in the markets. I'm saying not necessarily a bubble, maybe not necessarily, because of the actual real profits that are being generated here. On the issue of statistics, the numbers that we released and we were talking about here on this show that have now become pretty well mainstream related to school testing and the results of achievement tests throughout Ontario, and we've been talking about that for a couple of days now, and it's good to see mainstream media starting to report the fact that you go back a couple episodes, you've got the actual details, but that kids are just not passing the grade when it comes to achievement scores on everything from math to being literate and reading. With that, there's been ongoing reaction, and another comparison has just come out, is that the Ontario Catholic School Board is doing better than the broad public school board. Their students are doing better. Now, I know it's going to make people furious and you're going to get all kinds of anger, but it's simply a fact. What should be researched now is why the Catholic system, now they still got their problems and it's not overly exciting in terms of their results, but why are they doing better? Let's not be afraid to look into that instead of just doing the usual thing and screaming about class sizes and all research, and you can just research this on Chat or Grok or Google all day long. Class size is not the significant factor when it comes to student achievement. It's time on task, It's the focus of the teachers. Class size is not, I repeat, is not a driving factor when it comes to student achievement. And so let's look into some of the stats and some of the reasons why, instead of coming up with accusations that don't really have any science bearing to them. The school board officials, and I'm not talking about teachers here, I'm not talking about dedicated teachers, but the unions that drive the teachers, unfortunately, in the Ottawa Carleton area, the union leaders there are saying, well, the reason is actually not just class size, but too much diversity, too many students from different backgrounds. And isn't this a bit counterintuitive? Haven't we been told for years that diversity makes for a better system? And we believe that, actually. Diversity in educational choice will produce a better system. But here, the union officials in the Ottawa Carleton area are saying it's diversity within their own system that is causing this drop. That's a bit concerning. Is that saying that immigrants are causing the problem, that you have diversity in the classroom? That's a little bit scary, and I'd like to see them back away from this and look to what they can do to improve these scores, and more than the recommendation that's coming out of the Ontario School Federation, that union, saying, I tell you what, to fix the problem, just scrap the tests, just scrap all the tests. Very interesting reaction there. Well, the federal Liberals have succeeded in doing something which ecumenical leaders have not been able to do for decades, and that's to bring religions together on a common front. So we've got, in terms of representation from the Catholic community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, the Christian community, all about the fact that the Liberals are proposing to scrap one of the most critical parts of our Constitution of Rights and Freedoms, Article 2. And Article 2, the first thing it talks about is the protection of religion and religious exemptions for types of speech. And here you have the Liberals wanting to get rid of that, and they have united religious communities right across the country in terms of opposition to that. The Liberals are getting such a rough time at committees. They've now begun to cancel some of the committee meetings. My prediction is, and thankfully, finally, when you see religious communities speak up on an issue, and often they're afraid to, often they don't want to, and they say, oh no, we shouldn't be involved, in civic life. Well, yes, in civic life, yes. Faith communities have always, as a matter of fact, for the last 2,000 years, been significantly involved in civic life, improvements in civic and civil life, whether you're talking about the development of hospitals and welfare systems and caring for people, have always been central to that. And it's only relatively recently, maybe the last 40 or 50 years, that you've seen religious leaders kind of shrinking back and saying, no, we should just talk within our own churches and we shouldn't be, imposing views on people and talking about our particular beliefs. No, when religious communities pull out of society, society loses in the long run and in the short run. So my prediction here, now people are saying, no, the Liberals are going ahead, nothing's going to stop them, they're going to cancel the religious exemption clause and take it away. I'm thinking maybe not. I'm thinking because finally, whether we're talking about pastors or priests or imams or rabbis, finally, I think the message is getting through. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, you're going to see the Liberals pull back on this. I hope it's true, because keep in mind, Article 2 in the Constitution, where it talks about religious exemption, that's the first one. All other rights really flow from that, because people recognize that rights, anytime a government tells you it's giving you certain rights, you need to be worried. Rights are God-given rights to the things that we value and cherish most. And anytime government starts saying they'll be the ones to extend those rights, that means they'll be the ones to take them away. So let's watch, let's see what happens as this continues. When you have concerns being raised about certain communities, as unfortunately we see the union in Ottawa, Carleton area, starting to say diversity might be the problem. When you have an issue being raised and it's a legitimate concern, often what happens is, rather than the concern being addressed, people who are being looked at play what we call the race card. They accuse those who are raising concern about being racist. And a clear example of this is happening in the United States right now. It's finally breaking more and more into the mainstream news that the Somalian community, especially in states like Michigan, where they have huge numbers, and I'll say this carefully, representatives from the Somali community, not talking about every Somalian, representatives in that community have been for years now funneling welfare money, social service money, basically, out of the country, and even finding that money finding itself back in Somalia, and even now it's being proven back in the hands of Somalian terror groups. Now, when an investigation like this happens, and it's seen to be true, as even the Democrats in the US are admitting, what happens? You get the media, the culturally Marxist mainstream media, and people in that community accusing everybody else of being racist, of saying, oh, you hate all Somalians. No, it's not the issue at all. If there's something happening at any level, then we should be doing, as Martin Luther King Jr. always advocated, judging it by the character of the issue and not by the color of the skin. This has nothing to do with skin color. And we should be very cautious about accusing people of being racist if they're bringing up a legitimate issue. We hope that this issue gets solved so that the Somalian community in the U.S. can continue to grow and thrive, but they're going to have some difficulty for a while because of corrupt leaders within that community. And Ilhan Omar, who is like their spokesperson on these issues, is getting furious and raging. I'd say let's just deal with the issue, whether it's happening in Canada, whether it's happening in the U.S., and drop this race baiting that goes on. It's happening in Canada also. We've recently seen at committee meetings related to immigration issue, a Conservative MP, Michelle Rempel, has been raising some issues that seem to have statistical backing, and that is that many times in court judgments where the judges are judging, especially on violent crime within an area or within a community, it's been factually proven that some judges will go soft on sentencing of violent crime if they think that means the person who was convicted might get deported because they're not actually citizens. They're here maybe illegally. And this has been very concerning. There's a number of cases on this, and Michelle Rempel and others has quite rightly raised the case of an individual who was arrested from another country and charged with rape and sexual violence relative to a minor, somebody under 18. And the judge in that particular case, which should have resulted in a pretty serious sentence, actually reflected on the fact that if the serious sentence was applied as it should have been, the person might get deported. I just want to say more and more Canadians, and Canada is a very immigrant welcoming country because we're all immigrants in one way, shape, or form, no matter how many thousands of years you want to go back on this issue. But we don't like the fact, Canadians of all backgrounds don't like the fact that serious crime is being overlooked because it might be, quote, an immigrant, a non-Canadian who did it. If it's a serious crime, they are not citizens, they're not here with acceptable status, then they need to be removed. And good for Michelle Rempel. It got the immigration minister furious, and again, you get the charges of race baiting, of being racist. No, that's not the issue at all. Why do the Liberals why do they rule this way? Listen, if you don't like these types of rulings, then you need not to be supporting the leaders and the political leaders who appoint the judges. Remember this, political parties, the party that's governing, they're the ones who appoint the judges. So these are liberally appointed judges. These are judges since especially the huge increase of liberally appointed judges when Justin Trudeau got in 2015. It continues under Mark Carney. It's now over 700 liberal judges have been appointed across the country and through the system. If you don't like these type of rulings, then why do you keep voting for and supporting the people who appoint the judges to make these rulings? We have for a long time, you've heard it here, of course you've heard it other places, about concerns at the UN, the corruption, the waste of billions and billions of dollars, the fact that many of the committees within the UN are controlled by leaders from countries that are corrupt, that are communist, that are severely socialist, that in many cases are failed countries. Many of the committees and decisions coming out of the UN are controlled by leaders and representatives in those countries. And the UN itself, we have said for a long time, does not have proper financial oversight. The billions of dollars that Canadians donate or give, or Americans or others give to the UN, are being used for nefarious purposes. And there's just been an arrest made, according to media. The former top diplomat at the UN from 2014 to 2019, her name is Frederica Mogherini, I hope I pronounced that correctly, has actually been arrested, and she's not the only one, relative to corruption and where the money went at the UN. So please, don't accuse people who are concerned about the UN, again, of being, anti-other country. These are genuine concerns. The UN has never had proper financial investment. It's why funds by the millions and millions of dollars will go to groups like Hamas, will go to groups like Hamas, who run not just terrorist programs, but education programs that literally pollute the minds of young children, teaching them how to kill Jews and wanting to kill Jews all over the world. So let's take more of a microscope to the United Nations, and let's demand of our own political leaders that they do that, so that our billions of dollars that we give and that we're paying taxes for giving are going to proper use and not improper use. Well, there's a recent phenomenon that's been being talked about more and more, because people are turning off of the news because there's so much bad news out there that people don't even want to hear or don't even want to listen to political leaders. So what's been happening, very interesting, on a number of platforms, you may have seen this, it's kind of funny, but they're called baby videos, and I'm not talking about the moms around the world who are quite rightly showing their babies, but this is where there are cartoon characters, let's say, of Putin and President Trump, and they're talking to each other, but they're talking to each other with baby faces imposed on theirs, and they're talking in little baby languages, but they're talking about very complex and real problems. So they're talking about actual real stuff, but they're doing it with baby faces and baby voices imposed. And what's happening is we're finding that people will actually watch those longer, for a longer period, than just immediately turning them off. And people who get anxious about the news, if you put that, you can still talk about the real problems, real facts, but put that baby face over the politician, and people tend more to watch it. And talking about what people are watching, Zachary Levi, of course, well known in the entertainment industry for productions, both TV and television, is talking about the fact more and more that the money from Hollywood, more and more money is going into supporting productions that we would call, let's say, faith-based or faith-valued. He talks about the well-known and just recent Sarah's Oil, a production that's really getting a lot of viewership and attention. Now, the caution here is whenever Hollywood puts money into something, be careful that it doesn't get, the film or TV series, that it doesn't get corrupted, but it's showing a fact that more and more people are demanding, consumers are demanding actually faith-based products with a positive message, and companies will support those. That's the good news of the day. Think about that as we go through the day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you with the weekend edition tomorrow.